Hello, ladies and gentlemen, dear listeners. Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back to the podcast. In the last episode, we are discussing the powers of the police. Of course, powers of the police. We started from section 31. We spoke about the powers of arrest, mode of arrest, blah blah blah. Okay, we discussed section 31 to 35 of the Police Act. And now we're going to be continuing still on the powers of the police. We start from section 36 of the Act. Okay. Section 36 of the Act. Arrest in lieu is prohibited by virtue of Section 36. Section 36 prohibits arrest in lieu. A person shall not be arrested in place of a suspect. What does that mean? Mr. A is being Mr. A, a suspect, is suspected of stealing, say, a car from a car garage or a carport, and then you cannot find Mr. A. The police then goes ahead to arrest Mr. A's parents. It is wrong. That's arrest in lieu. Okay, it is wrong. Very, 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 very wrong. A person shall not be arrested in place of a suspect. Okay, arrest in lieu is prohibited by virtue of section 36 of the Police Act. Now, section 37 talks about humane treatment of arrested person. A suspect shall A, be accorded humane treatment having regard to his right to dignity of human persons, and B, not be subjected to any form of torture, cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment. Okay, so section 37 makes provision for the humane treatment of arrested persons. The police force are not to treat arrested persons. They are not to torture them, to treat them inhumanely. Okay, now section 38, a police officer may that's arrest by a police officer without warrant. Now, police officer, remember we said they can arrest. They can arrest with or without warrant. Now, we'll discuss them differently now. So let's talk about arrest by police officers without warrant, circumstances in which, okay, a police officer can arrest without warrant. Section 38. Now, a police officer may, without an order of a court and without a warrant, arrest a suspect. A, whom is suspected on reasonable ground of having committed an offense against a law in Nigeria or against a law of any other country, unless the law creating the offense provides that the suspect cannot be arrested without a warrant. Okay, so now there are some offenses that before you can make an arrest for those offenses, you must have a warrant. Of course, there are offenses like that, but some offenses do not need a warrant officer for a police officer to arrest. A warrant for a police officer to arrest the suspect. Now, a police officer may, without an order of court and without a warrant, arrest in the following circumstances: a person whom is suspected on reasonable grounds, take note, reasonable grounds of having committed an offense against a law in Nigeria or against a law in any other country. B, who commits an offense in his presence. So when someone commits an offense in the presence of a police officer, the police officer doesn't need an arrest warrant to arrest the person. He can arrest such a person right there and then. Okay. Now C, who obstructs a police officer while in the execution of his duty, or who has escaped or attempts to escape from lawful custody. So a police officer is carrying on his duty and then you are trying to obstruct him. Okay. In such an instance, the police can arrest such a person who is causing such obstruction, okay, without a warrant. Okay, D, a suspect in whose possession anything is found which may reasonably be suspected to be stolen, or who may reasonably be suspected of having committed an offense with reference to the thing. Okay, so when anything that is suspected to be stolen is found in the custody of a person or a suspect, the police officer can arrest such a person without a warrant. And then E, a person whom is suspected on reasonable ground to be a deserter from the armed forces. Now, we are still going to discuss the Armed Forces Act. The desertion is an offense that only someone who is subject to the Armed Forces Act can commit. For instance, now, a military officer leaving his duty, desertion. Okay, so the police officer can arrest a military officer if he deserts his duty, if he suspects such an officer of being a deserter of the armed forces. Okay, we'll still go through the Armed Forces Act. Okay, now F, a person who is suspected on reasonable grounds of having been involved in an act committed at a place outside Nigeria, which, if committed in Nigeria, would have been punished as an offense. Okay, the police officer can also arrest a person without an order of court or without an arrest warrant, who is suspected to have in his possession without lawful excuse the burden of proof, blah 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 blah. Carrying dangerous weapons. Anybody who is found with a dangerous weapon on him. Okay, you can arrest anybody who he finds concealing his presence in a circumstance, maybe hiding. Okay, you can also arrest anybody whom he is directed to arrest by a judge or magistrate. Okay, and so on and so forth. Now take note 38.2. No person shall be arrested without a warrant except in the circumstances provided in section 38.1. Okay, take note. Nobody shall be arrested without a warrant except in the circumstances provided by 38.1. Now, the authority given to a police officer to arrest a suspect who commits an offense in his presence is exercisable in respect of offenses committed in the officer's presence only. Okay, take note. Now let's quickly discuss arrest without warrant by private person. Now, can a private person, a private individual like you and I, can a private person make an arrest? Section 39 of the Police Act. A private person may arrest a suspect in Nigeria who in his presence commits an offense, or whom he reasonably suspects of having committed an offense for which the police is entitled to arrest without a warrant. So yes, a private person can effect an arrest. Okay, I'll come again. Section 39 of the Police Act 2020. A private person may arrest a suspect in Nigeria who in his presence commits an offense, or whom he reasonably suspects of having committed an offense for which the police is entitled to arrest without a warrant. So a private person can effect an arrest in Nigeria. Okay, so now handing over of an arrested suspect by the private person, section 40. After a private person effects an arrest, what does he do? What does he do? What does such a private person do? Okay, we'll start from section 40 in the next episode. Thank you very much for staying with us.